My wife filed for guardianship over me, claiming I was a confused old man who couldn't be trusted to manage his own affairs. But at the competency hearing, my grandson stood up in the gallery and asked the judge a simple question. Could he show the court something his grandmother didn't know he had? The judge leaned forward, curious about the 15-year-old boy holding a laptop. When the screen lit up on the courtroom projector, the room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. What played on that screen unraveled 3 years of lies in under 4 minutes. Before I tell you what was on that recording, let me know where you're watching from tonight, my friend. And if you believe patience beats panic every single time, hit that like button for me. My name is Harold. I'm 68 years old, and for almost 50 years I ran a small print shop on the corner of 5th and Elm in a town outside Lansing, Michigan. Not the kind of print shop that does business cards and wedding invitations, though we did plenty of that too. I mean real printing. Offset presses, letterpress work, the smell of ink and solvent that gets so deep into your skin no amount of soap ever fully takes it out. I bought that shop from my father in 1979, and I never once regretted staying small. I never wanted to franchise it or sell it to some conglomerate. I liked knowing every customer by name. When my wife Eleanor passed 6 years ago, cancer took her slow and cruel. I thought my life as I knew it was over. We'd been married 39 years. I sold the house we raised our kids in because every room reminded me of her, and I moved into a modest 2-bedroom condo near the shop. My daughter Renee worried about me being alone. She was the one who suggested I remarry, if you can believe that. She wanted her old man to have companionship in his last years. I told her I wasn't looking, but 2 years later, at a church fundraiser, I met Denise. Denise was 59, sharp-dressed, quick with a compliment, and she made me laugh again for the first time since the funeral. I fell for her fast, faster than a man my age should probably admit to falling for anybody. We married 18 months after we met. My daughter Renee had reservations from the start, but I chalked it up to a daughter being protective of her widowed father, the way daughters do. I didn't listen closely enough. I should have. What Denise didn't know, what almost nobody outside my lawyer and my accountant knew, was that the print shop had never been just a print shop. Back in 1994, we'd landed a contract nobody else wanted, printing specialized security documents and watermarked paper stock for 2 regional banks and a handful of state agencies. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it was protected by contracts that renewed themselves for 30 years running. I never talked about the money. Eleanor and I had lived modestly our whole marriage on purpose, put our kids through college without loans, and quietly let the rest sit and grow in accounts Denise never had reason to ask about. I wasn't hiding it out of spite. I was hiding it because Eleanor and I agreed a long time ago that money talked too loud in this world, and we didn't want it talking for our family. Denise hated the shop. She hated the smell of it on my clothes, hated that I still went in 3 mornings a week, even though I'd technically retired and handed daily operations to my longtime foreman, Pete. She wanted me to sell it, take the money, and move to Sarasota where her sister lived. She wanted long dinners with couples from the country club and a house with a view of a golf course. I understood the appeal for some people. It just wasn't me. Underneath the polish, Denise's frustration with our modest lifestyle had curdled, over 3 years, into something colder than frustration. I just didn't see it happening because I was too busy loving my grandson. Marcus is 15. He's Renee's boy, and since his own father walked out on the family when Marcus was 7, I'd stepped in more than most grandfathers do. He spent every other weekend at my condo. I taught him how to run a Heidelberg press, how to mix ink to match a Pantone code by eye, how to read a room of frustrated customers and calm them down before they even finish their sentence. Marcus is quiet, the way I was quiet at his age, and quick with numbers in a way that used to embarrass his teachers because he'd correct them. Denise found him tedious. She'd sigh whenever he came over, make comments about how a boy his age should be out with friends instead of hanging around an old man's shop. She never understood that Marcus and I didn't need a crowd. We had ink under our fingernails and old jazz records playing in the back room, and that was enough for both of us. I noticed small things changing about 8 months ago. Denise started asking pointed questions about the shop's finances, dressed up as casual curiosity. She asked about my will. She asked whether Renee or my son David were listed as beneficiaries on anything, and how that might change if, God forbid, something happened to my mind before it happened to my body. I brushed it off as morbid small talk. I was a fool for that. The morning everything broke apart, I was at the shop, running a proof for a customer's anniversary invitations, feeling the paper for weight and texture the way my father taught me. Pete came back from the front counter looking pale and told me 2 men in suits were asking for me. I walked out front wiping ink from my hands with a rag, and one of them held out a thick manila envelope like it was something he didn't want to be holding either. "You've been served, sir," he said. I opened it right there at the counter, ink still on my fingers, smudging the corner of the first page. It was a petition. Denise was filing for legal guardianship over me. The document claimed I was exhibiting signs of early dementia, that I was becoming erratic and paranoid, prone to confusion about money, and unsafe to be left managing my own financial affairs. She was asking the court to appoint her as my legal guardian, with full control over my accounts, my property, and, buried near the bottom in language dense enough that most people would skim right past it, decision-making authority over my contact with family members she believed were, quote, contributing to my agitation and confusion. That last part was about Marcus. I stood at my own front counter and read it twice to make sure I wasn't the one losing my mind. Pete asked if I was all right, and I told him I needed to sit down in the back office for a minute. "I want you to understand something about me before I go further. I have never in my life been a man who raises his voice. 49 years running, a small business teaches you that. You cannot yell a stuck press back into working order. You cannot shout a customer into forgiving a printing error. You solve problems with your hands and your patience, not your volume." So I did not call Denise screaming. I did not drive to the house we shared and pound on the door. I sat in my back office, surrounded by the smell of solvent and old paper, and I called my lawyer. Sam Delgado had handled my business affairs for over 20 years. He'd done my will, my trusts, the incorporation papers when I'd finally set the shop up properly to shield the family from liability. When I told him what had landed on my counter, there was a long silence on the line before he spoke. "Harold," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not go home tonight." He explained what I was too shaken to piece together myself. A guardianship petition, especially one alleging cognitive decline, is one of the most devastating legal weapons a spouse can use against an older person because courts are cautious. They're built to protect vulnerable elderly people, and that caution can be turned into a blade. If a judge granted even a temporary emergency guardianship while the case was pending, Denise could freeze my accounts, control my movements, and restrict who I was permitted to see, all before I'd had a real chance to defend myself. Sam told me if I went home and there was any kind of argument, any raised voice, any moment Denise could photograph or record and twist into evidence of instability, it would hand her exactly what she needed. I checked into a Best Western off the interstate that night with a duffel bag Pete helped me pack from the shop's back closet, spare shirts I kept there for when a job ran into the ink. I sat on the edge of a stiff hotel bed with the guardianship petition spread out in front of me, and I thought about Eleanor. I thought about how she used to say that a quiet man who's been wronged is more dangerous than a loud one, because the quiet ones are already 3 steps ahead by the time anyone notices they're moving. The next morning, the second blow landed. Sam called to tell me Denise had gone before a judge that same afternoon, alone, and been granted a temporary emergency order, citing what she described as my sudden and alarming disappearance from the family home as further proof of erratic behavior. Never mind that her guardianship petition was the reason I'd left. The order restricted me from the house, and more devastatingly, it flagged concerns about, quote, unsupervised contact with minor grandchildren pending a full psychological evaluation. They were using Marcus as leverage before I'd even had a chance to see him. I logged into the shop's business checking account from the motel's flimsy desk to make sure payroll would clear for Pete and the other 4 employees. The number on the screen didn't move. I refreshed it twice, thinking the hotel Wi-Fi was lagging. It wasn't. The account was empty. Then I checked our joint personal account, the one Denise and I used for groceries and utilities, expecting maybe a few $1,000s sitting there. 0. She had methodically drained everything I hadn't locked away in the older trust from before our marriage, everything she had access to over the previous several days, while I was at the shop running proofs and none the wiser. She wanted me broke and boxed in before the first real hearing even happened. She wanted a judge to look at a man with no access to his own money, freshly kicked out of his own house, unable to hire proper representation, and see exactly what her petition claimed to see: a confused old man in freefall. She had no idea what she'd actually done. She thought she knew every account I had. She had never once asked about the print shop's older holding accounts, set up back before I even met her. still legally separate under the original family trust Eleanor and I built together in 1991. Denise had drained the accounts she knew about and left the ones that actually mattered completely untouched, because she'd never bothered to look past the surface of a man she'd already decided was too simple to have layers. I want to tell you about the week that followed, because it was the hardest week of my life, and I got through it the same way I get through a jam press. Slow down. Don't force it. Find the actual point of failure instead of yanking at whatever's closest. I parked 2 streets over from my old house on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a rental sedan Sam had helped me arrange, and I watched. I am not proud of surveilling my own home, but I needed to understand what I was actually up against before I walked into a courtroom. For an hour, nothing happened except a mail carrier and a kid on a bicycle. Then a car I didn't recognize, a newer SUV, too clean and too expensive for our street, pulled into my driveway like it belonged there. A man got out, younger than me by a good 15 years, dressed like he was selling something. He carried 2 suitcases inside without knocking. Denise came out onto the porch in a robe at 2 in the afternoon and kissed him like the neighbors weren't watching, which told me she wanted the neighbors watching. I recognized him after a moment, from a photograph on Denise's phone months earlier that she'd shown me quickly and explained away as her new financial planner, helping her, quote, get organized for retirement. His name was Roland. I sat in that car with my hands shaking, not from fear, from the specific, controlled fury of a man realizing the full shape of a con only after he's already 3 moves behind. Roland wasn't visiting. He was moving into my house, sleeping, presumably, in the room where Marcus stayed on his weekend visits. I did not storm the house. I wrote down the SUV's license plate, the time, the date, and I drove straight to Sam's office. Sam had already been digging, and what he'd found made the temperature in his office feel like it dropped 10 degrees. Denise wasn't just unhappy in the marriage. She was underwater. Sam had pulled records showing over $140,000 in debt Denise had quietly accumulated across 4 different credit lines and 2 personal loans I'd never co-signed or known existed, money that had gone toward, among other things, a boutique investment fund that Roland happened to manage. That fund didn't exist with any state or federal registration. Sam brought in a forensic accountant named Priya Okafor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who within a week had built a paper trail showing Roland had run nearly identical schemes in Ohio and Indiana over the previous 9 years. Always the same pattern. Find a woman recently remarried to an older, financially comfortable man. Position himself as a trusted advisor. Encourage secret debt in her name to fund a fake investment vehicle he controlled. Wait for the marriage to collapse, then help engineer a legal maneuver. In one prior case, a fraudulent power of attorney. In Denise's case, a guardianship petition that would let her walk away with a controlling share of marital assets before the husband could organize a defense. Roland would then vanish with his cut before anyone untangled the fraud. Denise wasn't running this scheme. She was the mark being run by it. And in her desperation to escape debts she couldn't explain to me, she'd let Roland convince her that painting me as mentally incompetent was the fastest, cleanest way to seize control of assets big enough to cover what she owed him and disappear together. The forensic report was one victory. It didn't solve my most urgent problem. All the proof I needed of Denise's hidden debt, the actual paper statements Roland had insisted she keep physical and off any shared cloud account, sat in a locked drawer of a filing cabinet in my own home office. A home I was legally barred from entering. I sat with that problem for 2 full days, running it over and over in my mind the way I'd trace a wiring diagram looking for a short. I could not go to the house. I could not send anyone else to break in that would taint any evidence and possibly land me in worse legal trouble than Denise was already in. I needed someone already inside, someone I trusted completely, someone who wouldn't be searched or suspected. That was when the old landline in the print shop's back office rang after midnight, forwarded automatically to my cell the way it always had been, since I set that system up decades ago for after-hours emergency calls from clients. Almost nobody had that forwarded number anymore. Only Pete. And because I'd given it to him for exactly this kind of situation 2 years earlier when he'd started staying over some weekends, Marcus. "Grandpa, is that you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I sat straight up in that stiff motel bed so fast my back protested. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice level even though my heart was slamming. "I'm here. Are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm in the garage," he said. I climbed out my window. Grandma took my phone 3 days ago. She said it was because I kept, quote, upsetting you with visits. But Grandpa, that doesn't even make sense. You never seemed upset. I found the shop's number written on the fridge from when you gave it to me, and I used the garage landline extension. He told me things that made my blood run cold in a way 49 years of business disasters never had. He told me Roland was living there now, sleeping in the master bedroom while I was locked out of my own house. He told me he'd overheard Denise and Roland at the kitchen table 2 nights earlier, going through papers, and Roland had said something about how having, quote, an observant teenager underfoot complicated things, and mentioned a specialized boarding academy back east that dealt with what he called family disruption cases. Denise had laughed and said it would be a relief to have one less complication, while they, quote, finalized the estate matters. They were talking about sending my grandson away to get him out of the picture entirely. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping into a register I didn't recognize in myself, I need you to listen to me. I am not going to let that happen. Do you understand me? Not for one single day. I can be brave, Grandpa, he said, and God help me. Hearing that steadiness in a 15-year-old's voice broke something open in my chest. What do we do? I told him about the filing cabinet in my home office, the physical statements Priya needed, and I told him I hated even asking a child to do what I was about to ask. He didn't hesitate. He told me he already knew where the spare key was hidden because he'd watched Denise put it there behind a row of old cookbooks the year before, back when he still noticed everything, the way I'd taught him to notice things in the shop. Wait 2 nights, I told him. Wait until you're absolutely certain they're both asleep. Take clear photos of every page. Don't take the originals. Just photograph them and put everything back exactly where you found it. 2 nights later, at 1:47 in the morning, my phone buzzed with 11 photographs. Bank statements, credit card bills with Roland's fund listed as the payee, a handwritten note in Denise's own hand, outlining, in chilling detail, dollar figures she needed to, quote, clear before the divorce filing, alongside a private academy's tuition invoice with Marcus's name already typed into the enrollment field. They'd already started the paperwork to send him away. I did not sleep that night. I sat in that motel room and I felt something Eleanor used to warn me about, the specific cold clarity that comes right before a man does something he can't take back. I didn't act on the fury. I called Sam and Priya first thing that morning, and I put every photograph in their hands. What happened over the following 3 weeks was, frankly, the most satisfying legal unraveling I have ever watched. Priya's forensic report, combined with Marcus's photographs, gave Sam everything needed to petition for an emergency hearing to dissolve Denise's temporary guardianship order. The judge who'd granted it originally, a careful, unhurried woman named Judge Alvarez, agreed to hear us on an expedited basis once she saw the scope of what Sam had filed. The morning of the hearing, I sat at the defense table in a suit I hadn't worn since Eleanor's funeral, my hands steady on the table in front of me, exactly the way they'd stay steady over a jammed press. Denise sat across the aisle looking thinner than I remembered, her lawyer whispering to her urgently. Roland was nowhere to be found. Priya later told us he'd wired what remained of his accounts overseas. The moment he got word, a forensic investigator had started asking his previous victims' families questions. Judge Alvarez was midway through reviewing Sam's filed evidence when there was a small commotion at the back of the gallery. Renee stood up first, and beside her, Marcus rose too, holding his laptop against his chest like a shield. Your Honor, Renee said, her voice trembling but clear, my son has something the court needs to see, something my stepmother doesn't know, he recorded. The judge looked at this 15-year-old boy for a long moment, then nodded and asked the bailiff to help connect the laptop to the courtroom display. What played on that screen was 11 minutes of footage Marcus had quietly recorded on an old tablet propped against a bookshelf in the kitchen 2 separate nights, capturing Denise and Roland discussing, in their own voices, the plan to have me declared incompetent, the plan to drain what they believed were all my accounts, and the plan to enroll Marcus in a facility 1,100 miles away specifically so he could not, in Roland's own recorded words, keep telling people what he's seeing in this house. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the ventilation system. Denise's lawyer put a hand over his own mouth. Denise stared at the screen with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. Not shame exactly, more like the look of someone watching a structure she'd built collapse floor by floor in real time. Judge Alvarez did not raise her voice either, and I respected her more for it. She simply said that the court would be dissolving the temporary guardianship order immediately, referring the matter for a full fraud investigation involving Roland, and strongly recommending Denise retain separate criminal counsel, given what the recording and the forensic financial report together suggested about her conduct. I will spare you the months of legal proceedings that followed, because frankly they were tedious, full of filings and continuances the way these things always are. What matters is this. The guardianship attempt collapsed entirely. Denise ultimately pleaded to lesser charges related to the fraudulent debt scheme in exchange for cooperating in the case against Roland, who was eventually located and extradited from another state to face charges in 3 separate jurisdictions for what turned out to be at least 6 similar schemes against older men. I want to tell you about the afternoon a few weeks after everything settled, because it's the part I actually think about most, more than the courtroom, more than the vindication. Marcus and I were back in the print shop, just the 2 of us on a Saturday, running a small commemorative job for a local historical society. I had him mixing ink, matching a deep forest green to a swatch by eye the way I'd taught him. I set down my rag and I called him over to the back office, where I keep an old steel lockbox in the bottom drawer of my father's original desk. I told him it was time he understood something about our family. I opened the lockbox and laid out documents on the desk. The trust paperwork Eleanor and I had built decades earlier, the actual account statements showing what the security printing contracts had quietly become worth over 30 years of compounding. Marcus looked at the numbers, and I watched him do what I'd done the first time my own father showed me. Trace his finger down the balance line, counting the zeros twice to make sure he wasn't misreading it. He asked me why I never told anyone, why we drove a 12-year-old truck and ate dinner at the same diner every Thursday instead of living like people with that kind of money live. I told him what my father told me, standing in that same office 40 years earlier. Money you flaunt is money people will scheme to take from you. Money you keep quiet is money that buys you freedom nobody can touch. I told him that real strength in this life rarely announces itself, that the men and women who make the most noise are usually the ones most afraid of being seen clearly. Then I turned another page and showed him the new document Sam had drawn up. An irrevocable trust, established in Marcus's name, fully funded, his college guaranteed, protected by language so airtight that no guardian, no step-parent, no con artist masquerading as a financial advisor would ever be able to touch a cent of it. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he hugged me the way he used to when he was small enough for me to lift off the ground, except now he's nearly as tall as I am, and I just stood there in that back office that smells like ink and my father's whole life, holding on to the one thing in this world that actually matters. We spent the rest of that Saturday finishing the print job, old records playing on the same beat-up turntable I've had since 1985. We didn't need to announce anything to anybody. We didn't need Denise's country club or Roland's fake fund or a house with a golf course view. I've run a print shop for almost 50 years, and if there's one thing that work has taught me above everything else, it's that a press running too loud, clattering, and shaking is usually the one about to break down. The presses that last decades run quiet. They run steady. That's the lesson I hope you take from this, my friend, wherever you're watching from tonight. Real strength doesn't need volume. It doesn't need an audience. It waits, it watches, and when the moment finally comes, it doesn't have to raise its voice at all. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and tell me down in the comments about a time in your own life when staying quiet turned out to be the strongest thing you ever did.